This
is a
conference
topic
will
which
now
been
be
asked.
recorded.
So this is the topic being asked to get a revise. That is the last topic for the session for the revision, and that is your sudo and su commands. It's been asked to revise it. Diksha is not there. So su stands for your switching up the user. There are how many types of accounts in Linux actually? So there are basically including your root account, the administrator, the regular accounts. These are types of accounts like root account, regular accounts, and the special accounts. Various categories of accounts that are available in Linux. New user accounts can be created with, you want to create any new user account, you can create by using a command called user add. So user add is a command for creating a new user account with very graphical utilities. New groups can be created with group add. So group add is a command for adding groups. File systems can be accessed by using mounting command to specify a device and a mount it. So you can mount anything. Mounting means attaching to a file system or detaching. So file systems can be accessed by using a mount command. First you have to mount. Automatically it will mount for you to specify a device and a mount point. df and do commands to display the status and size about your file systems. So df is the disk space, find and how much disk is being utilized. That is about your memory capacity, and that is about the disk spaces. So regular user accounts for the who can log in on a keyboard and use the, like you and me are the regular users. And one is your administrator and a root user that actually works behind the scene. For example, maintenance of accounts, deletion, addition of accounts, your passwords, your security, everything works by your root administrator. And one is a regular user who always makes files, who can work in or his personal domain. So regular user accounts name typically use a combination of first name or initial or the last name. So regular user is nothing but a normal user. And what do you mean by a root user? Root user is a administrative account on the Linux system. Root is sometimes also called as your super user. Root has a complete control over the system. Root has a complete over the system. When operating as a root, small typo rm command can be irreversibly delete all the files and systems. For example, if you write a rm command and if you are a root, then you can mistakes or you cannot irreversible many of the commands. So root is means a highly privileged user with some specialized, or you can say everything he can do with your accounts. Even change the password, every privileged right he root has. The root is also called as a super user. So if a root user writes rm command remove, so it will delete all the files permanently. You cannot roll back or you cannot retrieve back. Server programs such as web or print servers typically run as a privileged users, not as a root, because running programs in this way limits the amount of damage. So in root as a means for user, and there are other commands also which are behaving as a root but not properly as a root system. So root means a full rights, anything or everything you can do it, but other things there are servers who can act like a root but they cannot be a real root. Fine. So real root user is highly dangerous and it will delete or it will damage the system if you're actually working with the root, because you don't know what you are going to do with the system. Now if you have to become a root user, you want to do anything that requires a high privilege levels, that means administrating your system. When you log on as a regular user but you want to privilege of super user, then you want to become a root, then you have to use the command su. Now su is a command in Linux to switch on from a normal or regular user to a root user. Instead of coming out of the shell, it was coming out of environment and then again switching off. Linux gives you an advantage that you can in between switch between one user. That is actually called switching of the users also. In some wood it's called switching from your regular user to a root user. So root user has a high privilege level and normal regular user has some less, or you can say it works in its own domain. So if you want to switch it to a super user or you want to go for a root user, then you use the command su hyphen. That means you want to go to the root. Fine. The shell then prompts for you for the root password. For getting into a root user account or getting as a root administrator, it has a password. So root has a password. If you know that password, you can switch out to the root. You type the password and you enter to a root. Fine. So one is your regular user, like you are using in your labs. Fine. In Ubuntu, you cannot be a root. Root is disabled. So everyone is a regular user. So you cannot be a root. You cannot use su command hyphen in Ubuntu because the root is disabled. Fine. Similarly, as a special user account for this, so it is a SU is nothing, has a control over the entire Linux system. The user with the user identity, obviously the root user has a user identity number 0. The only account with the permission to modify the root directory of the Unix or Linux system. It is capable of doing what a normal user can't do, such as changing the ownership rights, adding or removing the files from the system directory, installing the new packages, and many other things. Fine. So it can do many blunders or many additions. So user can do anything in the Linux file system. The root directory is different from the this option. This slash is called a root directory. It is different from a root user. So root user is a different root user is a different and root directory is a different thing. Root directory where your file system is actually mounted, and root user is the person who actually logins with the high privileged rights. Now one user is called the use user, that is also called as a super user. This user can override all the permission restrictions for all your system resources. It can override what you have masked it, what you have by default gated it. It can override and give it its own permissions, that what to write, what to read, and what to execute, permission restrictions for all the system resources. For example, default, when you create a file, you will get the default permissions, and the root user can change that default permissions to any of the stuff. In some Linux distribution, you can log in as a root user to have these rights. In Ubuntu, you cannot log in as a root, but to use you cannot log in as a root. Roots are disabled in Linux. So root administrators or root login is actually disabled. You can use the sudo command. Now sudo command is actually to behave like a root user. Though you are not the original root user, but you can behave with some specialized rights. You can behave as a sudo is to issue a command to act like a super user. You are not at all a real root user, but act like a. For that one, you can use a sudo. Sudo defines for your super user what super user can do. So sudo is what the super user can do. That is called a sudo command. Fine. Su is switching from a regular user to your root user, and su do is actually what the super user can do as a root user, though you are not the root user. Fine. So you can write anything. For example, you want to work it, you can write sudo. You want to work it in any of the editor, via editor, and you can tell the this is a file, this is a folder, and you want to work it in that file. Note that not every user has a right to use a sudo. You cannot use, every regular user can use a sudo command. normal user or regular user cannot have a right to use the sudo command, because it is also have the some rights, some high level privilege rights. To need to edit the file, now there's a one file called etc, there's a folder called etc, and etc has a file called sudos. Now sudos has a file which has the list of all the names or list of all the persons who can use this command. So etc sudos, root user can add you or make you as a super user. Similarly, sudo command can be used by the only list of users which have the name or which has already been added in the file called sudos. Fine. So to add the users, you can use it. For example, I want to add, I can use as a root user, I can add few users as sudos, and their name is added in this file. Then they can use the sudo command. Fine. So they can use sudo command if they are entitled or they are registered in this file, and the file name is sudos. So sudos is nothing but a sudo is nothing but a, you are behaving like a root user, but you are not actually the root. Now root accounts, same two types of accounts are there, user accounts and root accounts. System administrators has the root privileges, means he or she can access all the functions of the operating system. Principal user account is called as your root account. When you logged on into a root account, the administrator is called as a super user. When you have actually the root user account and password everything, you can behave as a super user. You can use a sudo command to execute any command that requires the, now this sudo command requires the root access. When you are logged into system with the regular user account, that has the root privileges. So sudo command is also used by one of the users who has some privilege light. So you have to make it a sudo, that login has to be made a sudo. So sudo command can be executed on any of the command that requires the root access. It's just a equivalent to your root access. Now understanding the role of system administrator. System administrator has a command line. For example, if you are a root user, you will get the directory by default root and your system host name and the root you are. And when you are entered or when you log in as a root, you will always get this hash prompt. When you are entering in your command prompt on Linux system, you will get this kind of nomenclature: root, hostname, root, and the hash. When you are entering as an ordinary or a regular user command, you will get the username, hostname, your username, and your dollar prompt. For normal user or regular user, you will get the dollar prompt, and for root, you will get the hash prompt. There's a difference between that, why it will get to know that you are in the root login or a normal user login. So these two signs will differentiate you that you are in the root login or in the normal user login. If you are in the normal user login, you will get your username and the machine name. Similarly, if you are used as a root login, you are as a root and the host name. Fine. So users in the group accounts, I tell you about already this one, that is a multi-user. Linux operating system is nothing but a multi-user and multitasking system. Most important user account is a super user account, and that refers to as your root account. This account is used by system administrator and perform administrative tasks on the Linux system. The super user account can be used in several ways. Either you enter as a root login, either you switch on, su means switch the user, either you enter as a normal regular user and switch to your root user by using su. Either you are a sudo, or you can use a sudo command to switch on to your root, or you can behave like a root user, or you can modify your SUID root files. So these are the various ways in which you can behave like a root user. Either root login, either switch the user, either you switch to a super user mode with some privileged right, or you can modify su bits or su writes root files. Fine. So su command is temporarily changes the right to another user without any parameter. If you don't mention anything, you write su and hyphen, you are changing to a root user. Hyphen is after su command causes the command to run the login script. Place your login directory of the user like this command. When you use su hyphen, it will get back to your root user with the high privileged rights. And if you are entering in with a normal or a regular user, you can switch to the account. That account is called as a root account. It will prompt for the password. When you prompt for the password and your password is right, you are get into a root, and hash indicates then that you are now in a root directory or a root login. Fine. If you don't know the password, you cannot. This dollar signs indicate that you are in a regular user. You want to switch on to a root user, you have to write this command, switch to a user su hyphen this. If you want to go to the root, fine. If you want to go to another login account, for example, currently I am in Meenu account, I want to go to another account, let it be a xyz account, and I write here to another xyz, so I will get back to another user account also, everything. Fine. So su dash hyphen, that means switching up the user. If you're this using without any name or only a hyphen, that means you are going to a root account, and it will ask for the root, and every root account has a password. It asks for the password. If you know the password, it is get into your root account. Fine. Already discussed this one about becoming a root. Fine. So we come back like this one you discuss. For example, this is a screenshot of a one script file I've taken up. For example, you are currently in a normal user, that is a low, that is a normal user or regular user. Fine. That is a host name or a machine name. Fine. He wants to switch off to a root user. He write su and the hyphen, and it will ask for a prompt. Fine. Now once the password is done, it get back to the root. Now alloc is a normal user, get back to the root user. So root user is around root at the rate Linux storage, and now the prompt has been changed. Now $2 hash. Fine. Now you want to use, for example, this command. You can use this file. After getting into a root account, you can access confidential folders and a file system folders. Like for example, this, you cannot edit the sudo folder or cannot go and cannot access these folders. So after getting into a root folder, you can use the grep command. For example, searching. I'm searching for a sudo alloc is a sudo, so I go use a grep command. My patron is alloc. Fine. The folder name is root has a folder called etc has a file called sudo files, and that means change the color. So it will show me when it will the output of this command is this. When I press it enter, it will show me by changing of color. This is a color change. All, it has all rights to access. Now alloc has all the rights to access the bin folder. Fine. Bin folder specialized binary file folders. It has a file called fdisk. Similarly, he can access the user folder. User has sbin also, and user add. He can also add the four users. Similarly, he can also access the bash shell. So these are the few things he can do. Alloc can do, and he has a full rights. So sudo file. This is actually an entry of a sudo. That is who is act as a sudo user, or what he can do. Super user. Sudo is actually a person who can behave as a root user with some, not full the rights. Root has all the rights. Sudo has few rights, and what kind of right it is mentioned here. He can add the user, he can use the bash shell, various kinds of shells. So he can access the bash environment, he can add the user, and he can access this folders also. So alloc full the rights. That is why it is searching. It is searching the alloc. Grep is actually the pattern, and pattern is to be searched from this file. So that is the grep folder. Fine. So this is your grep, this is your patron, and this is your file. Fine. Now this is your entry after grepping. The output of this is this. Fine. Now still you are at the root user. Exit that. You want to come out, and again you come back to the alloc.
Ma'am,
You can come back to alloc. Now you can use this sudo bash. Now the alloc can act as a sudo because his name is mentioned in the sudo's file. Fine. Now Linux, he can use the command sudo bash. He can work in that bash environment. Now this sudo command, there is no need for writing the sudo command because we know that he can use the bash file, bash environment, or user. So there is no need. For example, if this command will tell you about the disk status, all full status of the disk, how many drives are there, what is the capacity, how many bytes, disk status, how many heads, how many sectors, without using the sudo command. You can use or you cannot use the sudo command. Now we know that these kind of functions, so there is no need for writing the sudo command. Same here, like this point in the etc sudo file, I have given besides specific commands to the user. These are the already been root has given the few things to the alloc. Fine, he can access, alloc can access all these folders. Similarly, the benefit is now the sudo command that you don't have to write each and everything sudo before giving a command. For example, there is no need for writing the sudo. If we already write the fine, for example, this command, he can bash, it will work. Fine, he can access the disk drives with L stands for the long information. So there is the long information physical device. That is, he can access the drive information. How many things are, how many optical sizes, bytes, cylindricals, everything. F this information. Fine. There is no need for writing the sudo command. Fine. So this is a rights given to the, that is why it is called switching of the user. So switching means coming back to your root user, again come back to your normal user. So su command. Fine. In Linux, to change user without logging off, you are not logging off your main shell or main environment. You are in between switching from one user to another. Fine. So you have the switching option su with the option you want to go for it, and with the username. You want to switch to another username account, you can mention the username. So you can, if you know that if the user is created by you and you know the confidentially and you know the password, you can switch to another account by using su. Fine. System administrator use this command frequently to become the root. For example, I'm a user. Fine. I have to modify some of the files. To enter directly into a root user is very much dangerous because the root has everything. So it is very much. So in a normal Unix environment or Linux environment, the normal user, regular user, everything is to be modified for root user. For root, it has a password or not, basic utility for the, so root definitely has a one password account. Fine. So su has various options, like this is a username or a login ID, and these are the various options like -c for the command to invoke the shell, help for the file, L for the login. Similarly, to preserve the environment, to move to the shell. If you want to move to the shell, you can use this command, either go for S or a shell. So these are various things, various options to work with your su login. Fine, same here. So it is very much better to, if you want to use a switch user command, then it should be handled in a very much sophisticated way, because that has the more high privileges and you have the higher rights. You can do anything with the sudo command and similarly with su command. Fine. Securing minimized root user time login in. It should be preferred that you should not enter with the root login. Fine. It should have also minimum time. You can use a switchover command between root user and login user. And sudo command is to perform the command as another user if you have right to do that is listed in. I'm saying if you are a sudo, so sudo name is mentioned in this file and sudo command, then you can use it. If you are a regular user and you can behave like a sudo, so your name should be mentioned in this file, then you can behave like a, then you can use the sudo command and you can behave like a root user with some of the privilege rights. Fine. So sudo command is nothing, a Linux command to execute the programs as a root or a super user. Sudo is nothing but a shortening of super user do. What the super user can do, its rights are being already mentioned in that etc sudo files. Once users sudo when they need to run a command or a program root, but do not wish to log out or switch their entries to root users, they will use the sudo command. The sudos are the few people who can behave like a root user. Fine. So you can work, for example, you want to work, you can write sudo -v, then you want to work as a shell prompt. Fine. Return back to your user account, so you can use sudo su hyphen. You can switch off to another account by using the sudo option. So type sudo su, you can switch to another account or a root account. This means a root account. If you're not mentioning the name here, that means you are entering to a root account. Fine. Sudos, you can access these kind of, for example, the above command, these are the optionals. For example, optional devices or anything, you can access these devices by using the sudo command. And if you had a name given in this file, if you have the name given in this file, that means per user per group what command they can run with the sudo command, and file can also edit it with the command which is called as visual doers. So there is another command, one is a sudos, and sudo is a file name, and the command which you can modify is your vi sudos. So vi sudos is nothing but the command to modify your sudos file. Fine. So same here, what the super user can do, I'll let already discuss you. Fine. So this is same here. Super user is your root. You can set the password by a sudo command. You can log in as a root by su command, and you can exit also. Normal user, if you are a normal user and you have the some privileged rights, so sudo user add, you can add the user. Fine. You can add the password to that user. If you have the rights to run this command, you can add the user, you can add the password also. You can similarly switch the user another name. So you can modify it also. User modified can be used. Contain the password, user can delete. So sudo can delete, sudo can add, and sudo can do everything if he has the rights. Similarly for the group also. So sudo can add the group if he has the rights and do any kind of steps with the sudo command. So sudo is nothing but giving a privileged right to a root, behaving or like a root user with some of the rights, not the full rights. Fine. So this is about your super user and sudo. So su means switching up the users to any account. It can be a root or it can be another account. Basically, switching means to switching from a root to a user to a root user. So this is about your, I think Disha has a query of this one. So I've explained what you mean by su and what do you mean by a sudo. Clear?
Ma'am, there is